Hello, everyone. Welcome back in. I'm Corbin Hostler, joined by Ross Merriam, and we are here to take you through the evening of Legacy. We thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us, and we are heading into round 7 of our tournament.
It is the last round of Swiss, so this is the round that makes or breaks the top 8 for our players. Some of them have been fortunate enough to just reach across the table, get a handshake, and lock their spot already, but many players with work left to do.
Yeah, and we're going to take a look at some of those who have been putting in work this weekend. We're going to look at the leaderboard, specifically the season 2 leaderboard for the NRG Championship. You can spot some of those players on there. The ones in orange, you'll see Harrison Canford, Jacob Cup, Jake Conan, Grayson Nimitz. They're already qualified for the 2025 NRG Championship. Other players on this list want to be. So we saw Ryan Hayes make a big run yesterday. See 65 points right there. Casey Ryback also made it into the top 8 as the Roger Suleiman yesterday, or into the, at least I know both of them made the top 16, but they round out our top 5 at 45 and 43 points respectively as we round out the list there. Garrick Alford, I know just, I believe, drew in this tournament, so we might see him later. So a lot of big names on here on the NRG circuit. And in fact, let's check in on how some of them are doing and our players to watch. You see Garrick Alford there at the top at 5-1, as is Joseph Geards. Both of them looking very good to top 8, depending, of course, on how things break. Going on down the list, Alden Cates, Casey Ryback, Ryan Hayes. Good runs yesterday, today, 3-3. Samuel Clayton, 2-4. Raja and Will, they dropped. But these are the players we have been following. And it turns out that we're going to be following them throughout the day a little more because some of these players, namely Garrick and Joseph, are doing very well. But for now, we're going to head down into round 7, where we're going to watch one of them immediately. It turns out here's Joseph Geards, Demir Reanimator, Nathan on your left playing Demir Reanimator as well. So we've got a mirror with top 8 on the line.
A big match for Joseph. You saw him near the top of that season 2 leaderboard with a lot of the other top names having a tough day today in Legacy. This is an opportunity for him to pick up a huge number of points, climb that leaderboard, and secure his spot at the NRG Championship. So, huge match for him. And for Nathan, really just wants to get into the top 8. There's still a lot on the line, even for the players who aren't on the leaderboard as well. And both these players coming prepared with what is the default best deck in the format. And this mirror match is very interesting because while most reanimation cards that get printed these days specifically say you can only target things in your graveyard, both Reanimate and Animate Dead can target creatures in your opponent's graveyard. So you have to be very careful when you cast your Entombs, because once Atraxa or Archon of Cruelty are in the graveyard, they're fair game for either player, and you really do not want to get hoisted by your own petard.
That certainly gives some play to the matchup. It really makes it so do you obviously both players are just going to go dueling Tamios here. But it sounds like it's a thing where you want, I say that. In fact, we're going to fight over this instead. Joseph's going to daze away Nathan's Tamio, and that's going to work. So, okay, Tamio advantage over to Joseph. What I was going to ask is if that means you want to try to just go instep and Tomb Reanimate and just hope it works, or if you want to try to sculpt out and be a hand and be the reactive one. Where do you think that kind of falls in this mirror match?
Well, you want to do both. So you don't want to Entomb Reanimate very quickly unless you have a very specific hand that has a lot of backup. So you're spending the early turns fighting over sources of card advantage like we saw with these Tamios, and trying to pull ahead on land drops and the ability to sculpt your hand so that when the inevitable counter war over Reanimate, Animate Dead happens, you come out on top in that counter war. So it's about patience, understanding that the reanimation plan, especially here in game 1, still matters quite a bit, because triggering Atraxa, triggering Archon can undo a lot of disadvantage that you accrued earlier in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to be spending these early turns preparing for that fight, and make sure that you come well equipped to win it, as opposed to just firing it off as soon as it's drawn.
And that's why you saw the Tamios get fought over, and to an extent why the play draw was important there, because it meant that Joseph was able, in absence of a force of will, to just slam his Tameo in, whereas Nathan's first one, at least, ran into a daze and has gotten countered. The second one, though, resolves, but at this point, Joseph's already got to transform Tameo, and then the cost of that land and daze, he's going to be able to accumulate what he hopes is some amount of value off of it to set up here.
Yeah, I did see a Brazen Borrower in Nathan's hand, so he can reset the Tameo Season Scholar with a bounce spell. But that might not be available to him after this Thoughtseize resolves.
Yeah, Thoughtseize is certainly a way to force the action. And Nathan says, okay, fair enough. Here, this is what I've got. A Murktide, a Brazen Borrower, an Animate Dead, a Tameo, and some kind of Invocation. Not sure what that last card is.
Yeah, very important what it is. It could be something like a Tomb, it could be a Thoughtseize. And the differences there definitely impact Joseph's decision.
Well, Joseph's certainly thinking about it. It's a big decision. Obviously, both of these players playing with top 8 on the line. We think Nathan is 4-1-1, so it's a little less straightforward. Whereas if Joseph on the pair down here wins, he goes to 6-1, and then all of a sudden has a great seed in the top 8 as well. So truly, obviously, a lot on the line for both players here. It makes it a really momentous Thoughtseize. Given that Nathan didn't use that mana he does have, you would think that if it was a Thoughtseize, perhaps he would have fired it off, but
well, whatever it is, it
it's
appears to be the take
now
for Joseph. That does leave the Brazen Borrower behind.
All right, well, still dueling Tameo's creature version versus the Planeswalker version here. After that exchange, a long Thoughtseize decision for Joseph, but he's got to feel like he's in an okay spot here in that, well, he is staring down at Tameo, but he's getting Tameo advantage of his own. And now he knows exactly what Nathan's working with. So he also has the information advantage.
Yeah.
The
real question is,
an Entomb is what chat is coming to our rescue on that invocation there.
So to me, that's a sign that Joseph doesn't have an answer to the Animate Dead. So he needed to take the Entomb and ensure that there wasn't going to be a big creature animated. And that likely means that your bounce spell on the Tameo is going to resolve.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see what he opts for here. Starts off with the attack in the land, of course, gets the clue token. And there it is, the Brazen Borrower, you called it. It's going to reset Joseph's transformed Tameo and try to swing some tempo advantage back over to Nathan. And that's why we're going to fight over this with a force of will from Joseph.
So there was the force of will.
Nice foil ponder from Lorwyn, the fish ponder. Shout out. All right. Well, that exchange again, both players you are mentioning, or sorry, as you mentioned, are really valuing their Tameo quite highly because all the card selection and advantage that comes about when they do get around to reanimating. Because as it turns out, for the reanimator mirror, there's been no reanimating thus far. There's not even been an attempt to reanimate thus far.
Well, there would have been if not for the Thoughtseize on the Entomb. That's for sure. Yeah. And thinking about it more, Joseph's line makes a lot of sense because you're going to need to either counter the Petty Theft or the Animate Dead, depending upon which one you leave, whether you leave the Entomb or the Petty Theft in hand. And taking the Entomb and countering the Petty Theft means that Nathan can't just draw and reanimate and still get what he wants. And so there's a lot more sort of replacement ways that he can top deck into, replacement cards he can top deck into that will replace the forced Animate Dead as opposed to the forced Petty Theft. So he really cut his opponent's outs by his careful choice with the Thoughtseize.
Yep. Well explained. That's one of those, obviously it applies to all of Magic, but in Legacy in particular, that's one of those that maybe if you've never played the format before, you might not appreciate at first glance, but it's sort of going on underneath the surface here as these players look like, oh, we're just trading all these spells back and forth, but which spells they're trading back and forth, there's a lot of thought being put into.
Yeah. As the formats get more powerful, you get more and more punished for giving your opponent outs because the outs are more powerful.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, and so you really have to think about what your opponent's outs are and try to limit them as much as possible in this legacy format. Because if you screwed up and give your opponent an out that you didn't have to, you could easily lose the game on the spot. And instead, Joseph is sitting here with the Tomio on 8, ready to ultimate. And
Yeah, we see Nathan goes for the ponder here and is actually just shuffling with it, going for a truly blank draw. I think there's another ponder to follow. Oh, it's an animate dead. Okay. Don't know if that's what we were looking for, but we'll see what's next. We're going to crack a clue. Okay.
it's definitely not what Nathan was looking for
A
because it's one of the cards
bowmaster.
that he put on top of his deck. It's
Yeah.
been in his hand. He put it on top, tried to shuffle it away, and drew it anyway.
Did not. He got shuffle bugged there.
Yeah.
Unlucky. This game's really gone according to plan for Joseph, largely again in part of getting ahead on Tamio advantage. He went first and was able to do that, but he's navigated all these turns pretty well because both these players been doing cantripping, been doing brainstorming, all of the works, and he's got it to this point where now both players somewhat low on cards in hand anyway. But he's got this Tamio at double the counters of his opponents.
Yeah. He was able to, through very careful play on turns, 2 through 4 ish, take the advantage that he generated on turn 1 with the days, and then it keep expanding that advantage until now it has become a Tamio ultimate level of advantage, and that is too much for Nathan to overcome.
And there we go. That is game one down. So I'm not exactly sure how players are going to sideboard in the mirror, but we're going to take a look at them. We'll see if we got any differences here. Let's take a look at Nathan's. First, you spot sort of everything you would expect, and in fact, it looks quite similar to any Demir sideboard we've seen today. But which of these cards do you actually want in the mirror?
Mirror is interesting because there are two schools of thought here. There is one that says the Entomb reanimation plan is too risky. I just want to cut it and become more of a traditional Delver style deck. And
Uh-huh.
I'll play some good threats like Daunty Voidwalker. I'll bring in removal for my opponent's Voidwalkers. I'll have better counter spells, more counter spells, and I'll just win all the relevant fights. And my opponent at the end of the game will be left with, a dead Entomb and 2 reanimation spells in their hand they were never able to effectively use because I had more disruption. That is what I generally see as the most common way that players sideboard.
Mm-hmm.
But there is another school of thought that says, if we're going to sit here trading resources a bunch in the early turns of the game, I want the best top decks possible. And there's no better top deck than put Atraxa / Archon of Cruelty onto the battlefield. So
Yeah.
at that point, you would choose some number of your weakest cards, try to skimp in the right areas. Maybe you cut down on Thought Seizes because that's a weak top deck in the late game. And you leave in some portion of your reanimation package to make sure that you have the best thing to draw to in the mid to late game.
Yeah, it's actually kind of ironically like the is it Cauldron Mirror in Standard, where people have this conversation of, well, do I cut all of my combo cards because they're bad when we're grinding in the mirror? And then, well, the other alternative is you get to these grindy games in the mirror, and it's like, well, what's the best thing to draw? Man, it would probably be my combo cards. So yeah, it's the same
Exactly. Very,
dynamic.
very similar dynamic there.
Yeah,
And
you
you
have to
see it
kind
in
of
Standard.
balance.
Players have different approaches. Some players cut almost all the combo, some cut very little of it, and it really is a matter of personal preference and what approach you want to take to the matchup. So We could see both players just cut the reanimation plan, and this becomes a Delver mirror. We could see one player leave it in and one not, or we could see both players leave some number of it in, and it'll really just depend on where they want to position themselves.
Yeah, maybe we can get a look over at Joseph, see if there's any differences here. Not a lot.
Yeah, there are some, but
The
very
dress
few.
down is in the deck. I don't know if that gets there, but
These lists are pretty standardized at this point. I
yeah.
do like that one Cling to Dust. That's a card that you can bring in and it functions as hate for the reanimation plan,
Mhm.
even if your opponent's going to try to reanimate your creature, if that ends up happening. But it still plays well in the fair plan because as the game goes long, you get to escape it a couple times and generate some card advantage from it. So
It's
that
perfect.
card I think is a really strong one here in the mirror because it's a good draw regardless of how the game is playing out. If you're playing
Yeah.
the Delver game or if you're playing the reanimation game.
It's a perfect one of in a sideboard. I know that. It's a you never feel bad drawing or milling or whatever, discarding exactly one of them, which is great. The other thing to mention is, you're talking about if people are boarding out some of it and how part of the dynamic in the mirror is, well, my opponent can reanimate my own stuff, and that makes it kind of a liability. Well, if only one player is trying to do reanimation stuff, well, then you're, perhaps a little more in the clear. But I guess it's probably also we talk about these different game plans. A lot will come down to, okay, well, who is able to land and protect Cameo, as you mentioned, kind of the Delver-ish plan, but uh, just that leads to opens up everything else, sort of regardless of how they choose to finish. So we'll head down to the table. Both players, I think, shuffling up, getting ready here. Uh, Joseph Geards up a game at 5-1, playing for a very high seed in the top 8 if he's able to take this one down.
Very high seed, a lot of leaderboard points, playing potentially for a spot in the NRG championships. So this is a big match for him. He is one game to the good, but now is not the time to rest on your laurels. Got to keep playing tight, keep playing clean magic, and get across this finish line.
Well, it's going to be slightly delayed because Joseph's going to take that mulligan. So not ideal, but obviously it's legacy and in a format where you play a whole bunch of brainstorms and ponders. Mulligans are more of a not necessarily a sign that your hand just doesn't function, but sometimes a sign of I actually just think I can do a little better.
And with the powerful cards that exist in Legacy, you can overcome a one card deficit quite easily. If you're the one that sticks the early Tamio, if you're the one that reanimates an Archon, that will undo a mulligan or two quite easily. So really very much about the right cards, not the amount of cards. I see another Daze in Joseph's hand. So if you can lead with Tamio Daze like he had in game 1, that would be a great start. See a Brazen Borrower.
Is choosing to keep this one. So Nathan's going to get us started, and we're going to see a turn 1 fetch. So we might have a Tamio over here to get things kicked off, return the favor from game 1. Tamio has really been a key card, not just in Legacy, but where obviously Brainstorm plays with it, but in Modern as well. Yesterday, it was a really important one, including in like Affinity decks we saw top 8.
Yeah, it plays a lot of different roles. For a one mana card, it does a lot of subtle things on the battlefield. The O3 body checks Rogavan. It generates card advantage in games where that matters, while being a very low cost threat, so you don't invest many resources into it. It generates artifacts for artifact synergies. It plays well with the cantrips and things, and then that becomes an alternate win condition in a lot of combo decks, the way we saw it months ago in Underworld Breach.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those cards that, I mean, it can be flashy, obviously. There's a lot of text on it, and the ultimate on the Planeswalker is incredibly powerful. But the initial impact of it looks like it's not going to be that much, but it does so many little things over the course of the game for so little cost. it ends up being a very, very strong card.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, you made the Delver analogy earlier just in how the decks might play out, and that is essentially how it works, right? So, I mean, it's a 1 mana blue card that we play on turn 1, and then if we can protect it, it'll probably win us the game. And that is, I mean, that is a Delver strategy, even if it's not exactly attacking for 3 points at a time.
Yeah, you transform it on turn 2, just like Delver, and then 3 turns later, they're dead. It's not exactly the same method of execution, but the result is the same.
And speaking of, here we go. Oh, so Joseph's going to fight this one with a daze, which is going to get dazed right back by Nathan's. I recognize that one. It's Invocation Daze right there. Also hope that he picked up an island.
He did. And the power of days on the play. It was Joseph with turn 1 Tomio days on the play game 1. Now it's Nathan with it in game 2.
No lands in play as we head into.
We know Joseph has a Brazen Bar.
It also means that just, sort of as a result, you're priced into that being your turn 2 turns from now if you can't answer it next turn, right? So it's just the mana advantage that Nathan is gaining stretches into the future here. So we see the only permanent in play. Well, I say that there's a clue. The only permanent in play outside of that clue was the transformed Tamio. But so we're going to get back on track here. Players actually having lands to cast some spells.
And importantly, Nathan found a fetch there. I don't think he had another land in hand when he cast the Brainstorm. Likely would have played the land first, even if it was a fetch, to more effectively play around at opposing days. So I think he was brainstorming, trying to find a second land. Not only did he find it, but he found a fetch land so he can reset the top of his deck as well. Wow. Now Thoughtseize at the very least can take the Petty Theft, the Brazen Borrower.
Would have been a huge days for Joseph if it had worked, right? If Nathan's digging for land with Brainstorm and you're able to catch the Brainstorm with days and prevent the Tamio, that would have just been huge in that situation. But instead, we just go this opposite way here. Nathan finds what he needs. He's able to transform Tamio. And, oh, by the way, you have no lands to play, and I'm attacking the hands you do have. There goes Brazen Borrower. So that answer that, the prescribed turn 2 turns from now that's not even an option. So Joseph's going to need to find something else to deal with this. And he's essentially starting from the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
Right back down to 6 cards, no lands in play.
He can play his Tamio with a day's backup, but it is several turns too late at this point. He finds himself in a very similar position to Nathan from game 1, where they has a lot of similar cards to his opponent, but one of them was able to transform Tamio early, the other wasn't.
And Nathan, not taking any chances here, has Fatal Push for Joseph's untransformed Tamio. Joseph's thinking about it, but it does resolve. Nathan has a mana open, so it can't be dazed there. Okay. Joseph's turn to go for the Brainstorm with 1 mana. But a dangerous sign. I mean, what are we digging for here? Just something. It's all about any of the couple of cards that can get at Tamio here next turn.
Yeah, there's a second Brazen Borrower, so that would be step 1. A Bitter Triumph out of the sideboard.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple ways to answer the Tamio. If you still have the reanimation package, you can try to reanimate an Archon. And if there's no creatures on the battlefield for Nathan, the Archon trigger will take out the Tamio as well. Those are Joseph's paths.
I guess can find one of them. If there's Bowmasters can ping it.
Yeah, but that doesn't really stop it because it's a -7. And if Tamio's been plussing, the Bowmasters isn't going to attack for anything.
Yeah, you're not going to get an opportunity to because you can't cast it now. So we'll be too late. Actually, Nathan's hand getting revealed now to Joseph's Thoughtseize, and we do see a Bitter Triumph, but the Ponder going to go. So Nathan's hand's going to be Misty Rainforest, Bitter Triumph, and Tamio in play being the most important thing here. Joseph taking a good long look, but knows that if he doesn't have an answer sitting on top, or I suppose at this point in hand for that Tameo, it will only be a look for game 3.
Here it is. I think that's Bitter Triumph. I think Joseph found it.
It's pretty clutch. He's thinking about it, though. Let's see. He's thinking, when do I wait? Should I go to upkeep, I assume, here? What are we looking at?
He knows he
that's a
can't
huge
get.
find.
He knows he can't get Force of Willed. I think he might want to wait and hope Nathan sacks the clue, and then you could Bitter Triumph in response to that. Because we know Joseph has 2 dazes in hand. So if Nathan taps down to only 1 mana, the 2 dazes can protect this Bitter Triumph.
Mm-hmm.
And you know Nathan doesn't have Force available because you left him with his last card as Bitter Triumph after taking the
Right.
Ponder.
So, yes. So
with Thoughtseize.
All right, so Nathan's going to fetch out a Surveil land here. Take a look at that top card. Obviously, these Surveil lands have made an impact in every format over, I guess it's been a year or whatever since they've been printed now, possibly even more. But they sure do hit different in a Reanimator deck.
And now Nathan's sacking the clue, and this is the window that
go.
Joseph was looking for. We'll gladly pay the 3 life, and now just the Bitter Triumph left over in Nathan's hand. Whatever he drew for turn, whatever he draws for turn next turn, and then the clue. So 3 random cards and a Bitter Triumph.
I didn't catch what he did with the Surveil here. Let's see what
it was a land that went to the graveyard, Marsh Flats.
Okay. Douthie Voidwalker. Okay, so we've been back and forth in this one, and the Tameo threatened to end the game. It didn't. So now all of a sudden we're back into a weird spot where, yep, it's 14 to 15 in life totals, and that's kind of what matters, at least at the moment. Douthie Voidwalker's a 3-2 that can start attacking. But here we go. Joseph's going to respond with his own Tameo. I think he's been trying to get that one into play for a while, and he's going to go for the immediate Brainstorm.
Immediate Brainstorm to transform, but the Tameo is immediately under pressure from the Dauthi.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's see what Joseph finds or wants to do. Douthie is a good one to pressure the board. Nice back and forth game here. These sideboard games certainly look a little different than some of the pre-board games look anyway.
Now, can Joseph find one of his own removal spells? So he can deal with the Dauthi and then have his own Tameo. He's then in the driver's seat. And he'll have a couple turns while the Dauthi's trying to attack down this Tameo. But looks like he has not found a shuffle effect, so he's going to have to work through the 2 cards on top.
Yeah, not exactly where you want to be with that, but
we also forgot to trigger our Tameo until after we played Undercity Sewers.
So, yep, yeah. Fair enough. We'll let the judge sort this one out real quick. Yeah, so all right, Joseph transforms Tameo here, is able to get a little bit of value, but it's going to be under immediate pressure, as you mentioned, from the Douthie Voidwalker, which, oh, by the way, has some, incidental benefits and its graveyard sniping ability. And Nathan has 3 cards in hand, and while they weren't great what he had a few turns ago, he's had a few different looks now at this point, one of them being Douthie, of course. So this game really is kind of reset from where we were a few turns ago when we were like, Joseph has to find one of 2 cards right now or else. And not only did he find one of those cards, it was the best one. because if it was Brazen Borrower, Nathan would have just redeployed the Tameo, and we could have just been back in this spot of Tameo staring each other down. Instead, he was actually able to find the true removal spell to get us back to kind of to ground zero with both players at just a couple of mana each.
Yeah, and then Nathan immediately finds the Dothy to keep the pressure on. Joseph replies with Tomio, and that brings us to a sort of parity, because if the Tomio gets to transform, it'll plus to 4, the Dothy attacks it for 2 after getting shrunk. And then the Tomio will go back down to 2, it'll plus to 4, the Dothy attacks it for 2, and it'll just oscillate between 2 and 4 loyalty, with neither player able to gain any traction. But looks like Joseph, it is ruled that he has to miss the transform trigger, and that's huge. Now the Dothy can start attacking in, and Joseph doesn't have the brainstorm to transform it again.
Oh,
Nathan, even more punishing, has the removal spell.
Yeah, I mean, you talked earlier about how punishing small mistakes can be, and while this isn't necessarily one related to the power level of the cards, it is sure punishing because that dismember Nathan's able to fire off there takes it all the way down. So Joseph's now going to fall to 11 life from the Dothy, which is now going to be even more, boy would presume, because there's an Orcish Bowmasters, although that's going to get dazed. So safe from that, free to resolve Ponder. 2 cards in hand for Nathan, along with that Dothy Voidwalker in play. I think 1 or 2 in hand for Joseph plus the Ponder. So, despite that sort of, mishap, not all is lost here.
Yeah, just needs to find a removal spell for the Dothy, and everything's back to relatively even. He's thinking about this pile. I'm wondering what you would ever keep that doesn't mean removal spell on Dothy. He could also be looking at a pile that's removal spell plus 2 bad cards, and he's wondering whether taking the removal spell is even worth it if he has 2 bricks beneath it. Or he could be looking at maybe his own threats, and he's wondering if he could potentially race the Dothy if he has 2 threats to 1. But he's pretty behind in that race right now at lower life total with the Dothy already established on the other side of the battlefield.
Yeah, that's one of the more interesting decisions he could be facing if it's in his case. He's going to go top with yeah. Okay, he's going to go for it. So, yeah, the decision of if he's actually got to make a choice of whether we're going to play and game plan towards reactive in terms of answering here or proactive. If I have a threat on top, do I just want to play a threat and see where things go? Because that has the potential to go very wrong. So as it turns out, just draws the card, passes the turn back. The Dothy knocks him down to 8, and a Barrow White hits the stack.
Yeah, a parade of threats here after the Tomio was answered for Nathan. That's exactly what he needed. Had the Dothy, then the Orcish Bowmasters, which was dazed, and now the Barrogoyf. And Joseph is running out of time and needs a lot of answers. Did have the option to reset the top of his deck if it was no longer good by sacking the Misty Rainforest. Chose not to, so has to like that card because he knew it was there, set it there with the Ponder.
All right, Nathan, just 8 points away from evening this one up. And as I say that, in fact, he has evened it up. Joseph scoops them up, and it is tied 1-1 here in round 7 in Mundelein NRG Championship Series. This is our 2.5K trial for Legacy. Joseph Geards at 5-1. Nathan Marhefke at 4-1-1. Both of these players playing for at least a shot at the top 8 or more in Joseph's case. So as they shuffle up, we get ready for game 3. But that sideboarded game, you mentioned it, right? That was not at all, or it could have been about, but it wasn't about reanimation. It was about the creatures beating down and the way we interacted with each other and making sure the other person can't play something that I just cannot answer. And that was what ultimately was the difference.
It certainly looked like both players were on the board out the reanimation package sideboard plan. So, that's 11 cards that could potentially come in. maybe it's not all 11 that came out and they let, just have a couple reanimates even without the big creatures, because you can always reanimate back a Tomio that gets countered or Orcish Bowmasters, and that can
Yeah.
still be quite effective. So you don't even have to board out all of them. You really just need to be boarding out all the Entombs and the two big creatures. So wouldn't be surprised if that was the case for both players, but now that they've seen it from their opponent, maybe they decide to go back to it, right? If they
Well,
think their opponent's not going to be prepared for it and they can get a leg up by having that powerful game plan, having access to it, we're still, we still have to play the cat and mouse game. You never reach a steady state solution to these sideboarding strategies. You
well,
can
look at what
always
they're
get away
doing,
further.
right? Like, we're both players going very deep here, to at least posturing.
Yeah, both players are aware of this cat and mouse game. They don't want to just reshuffle the same 60 and present. They know their opponent has gotten a lot of information in the previous game, so you just got to take the 15, put them in, take them out. Even if you're not making any changes, you can't let your opponent know that you're not making any changes, because that gives them a really powerful advantage, not only in terms of how they sideboard, but how they sequence and keep their opening hands, how they play the opening turns. All of those things are impacted by the potential things that your opponent can do, the ways in which they can punish you. And if you know that there are certain aspects of the deck that aren't there in their post sideboard configuration, those aren't there to punish you. It frees you up to play your cards in different ways, opens up your tactical versatility, and that's a significant advantage in these games.
So this is where sort of the idea of shuffle 15 cards in, shuffle 15 cards out, regardless of what you actually do with your sideboard. It seems maybe like a silly bit of theater if you're playing F&M or whatever, right? But when you're playing for thousands of dollars, every little edge matters, and it very much matters, say, for instance, to your opponent's opening hand keep mold decision. Maybe they keep or mulligan the hand based on something they think you did, and then maybe they decide to mulligan, and then they end up mulliganing into oblivion based on that, right? Like, and all of these are things that that just the tiny little mind games, of course, that can go into tournament magic, which sometimes people outthink themselves, but hey, sometimes it matters.
Sometimes it absolutely matters, and our players are going to pull out all the stops here in this very important match. Winner has a very high chance of being in the top 8. For Joseph, getting to that top 8, getting access to all of the leaderboard points that are available there, incredibly important. So leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, and at 5-1 too, this would move him to 6-1 ahead of anybody who would draw in at 5-1-1. So it's truly a lot on the line, because as we saw in both of those games, play draw matters a ton, and the higher seed, of course, we guarantee you the option to play first.
And in both games, it's been the player on the play with early Tomio backed up by Days that ended up winning. So we can see how important play draw can be in Legacy right here in this match.
Mm-hmm. All right, both players thinking about their opening hands, but I think that we're good to go, because it is a very shiny, beautiful, polluted Delta starting things off here for Joseph, who ultimately does decide to fetch after a bit of thinking.
Does he have the turn 1 Tomio, or is this game going to play out differently?
Yeah, we're 2 for 2 on Tamio starting the game off here. So it's obviously an important card in the whole format, but it's certainly especially important in the mirror here is a source of advantage / win condition that comes down before the opponent can reliably interact. Obviously, there could be a force of will, but we haven't seen one yet. Just a ponder, though. So,
okay.
Yeah, a little different.
Slower start.
Still, of course, though, could have his own days for Nathan, who obviously then could days back, right, or whatever. So, but that is the position of the game we're at. Joseph did not have the Tamio on turn 1. We'll see if Nathan is able to stick one on turn 1.
Didn't like his top cards. You have to imagine he's prepared for a threat from the opposing side, whether it's Tomio, Bowmasters, anything like that. Here is a Thought Seize. I think I see a Daze in Joseph's hand. that he might want to fire off on this discard spell, but
Yeah,
without any battlefield established, Day's alternate cost becomes a lot more costly.
it does. You essentially concede the play drawback. Well, he's thinking about it, but he does, with that Days in hand, opt to just let the Thoughtseize resolve.
So there's a land, Brazen Borrower, Days, Bitter Triumph, Fairy Macabre, and is that Cling to Dust in the middle? I think it's a Cling to Dust.
I believe so. So pretty solid hand here, as you would expect, for Joseph, and a bit of a choice here for Nathan. I don't know where you look. Obviously, it depends on the contents of your own hand. If you want to just grab that Brazen Borrower for sort of the long term, obviously there's the couple different options though.
It's an awkward hand because it's 2 pieces of graveyard aid and 2 removal spells.
Mm-hmm.
So normally you like to take an effect that they only have 1 of. And Daze is just kind of the weakest card in the hand because neither player has come out with a really fast start. And as the game goes long, Daze will eventually become a dead card. So knowing that the game is going to go long, you'd really like to not take the Daze either. So there's not an obvious good card to take on the sort of general principles of thought seizing your opponent.
And that's probably why Joseph allowed it to resolve instead of fighting over it in the first place. So it's ultimately the Daze that goes away anyway, and you didn't even have to pick up a land this way.
So Nathan potentially land light, thinks that Daze is going to stay relevant.
Oh, picks up a wasteland here.
Or is trying to force something through quickly.
He's just going to waste away Joseph's Surveil land, which we saw surveil a non-land to the graveyard. So he might also be putting Joseph on needing lands here. Just fire off the wasteland. My swamp versus your island.
But much like Daze, that's often best done when you have a threat on the board already to punish your opponent for every single turn where they're not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
With nothing on the board, the wasteland isn't nearly as punishing, and Joseph has time to draw out of it. So Nathan is in good shape here. He has his opponent very light on resources. He needs to work quickly towards trying to end this game. He needs to establish some pressure, whether it's Orcish Bowmasters, Murktide Regent, Tomio, a reanimated threat. Any of those will work. Just something to start attacking Joseph's life total.
Yep, Joseph missed the land drop, so you know that he's got gas in hand, but you also know that you have a window here if you can just find anything to start getting through. So we're going to try. We're going to ponder, look at the top 3, see if we can find anything that puts on that pressure. He does opt to keep them, so we like at least some of what we got going on here. But the follow, we're just going to pass with the 1 mana open back to Joseph. So Joseph, we know, is digging for lands, but he does obviously have a grip full of cards at the same time. So if he's able to draw out of this before Nathan can actually take advantage of the additional mana he is able to spend to a greater degree, he's got an opportunity to get back in this. Unfortunately, though, he is forced to just pass the turn back to Nathan.
Should have a couple turns to find lands, but won't have much more than that.
All right. Nathan picked up Brazen Borrower. I saw for the draw. He's going to go ahead and brainstorm here in the main phase. Has a land ready to go to shuffle that away. So continuing to set up with the idea being that if Joseph ever does break out, well, I've got my hand sculpted to deal with that. But as you said, it looks a lot better if you have even just imagine an Orcish Bowmasters, right? Even if you literally were just poking for 2 damage a turn this whole time, you'd have Joseph down to 11 or 13 or something that it starts to become concerning, as opposed to this, which is just, at this point, reasonable for Joseph to try to get out of. And in fact, there's a land for him.
Yeah. So now the board looks relatively even. You're ahead by a land, but you have no non-lands on the battlefield. Both players have very healthy life totals. They have full grips.
And Nathan didn't spend 2 mana on that turn. So because there was nothing in play attacking, he actually just gains no advantage in that cycle from having more lands than Joseph. And that's, look, if you're Joseph and you're trying to get back out of getting your second land wastelanded and trying to dig into it, that is what you need. Your opponent can't really press their advantage in any meaningful way, at least so far. But here we go. We're going to get things moving again. Nathan has found a Tameo, and it does just instantly resolve for him. So he's going to try to transform it. Here we go.
There's got to be some answers here for Joseph. He has a full grip of spells.
He let it resolve instantly, and he lets the brainstorm resolve.
Well, he can still respond to the Tameo transform trigger.
Yeah. So you don't want to give. So suppose you're Joseph, and you know your hand is a removal spell or something, right? And you know that the only way you can actually interact with the Tameo brainstorm is to remove it with the trigger on the stack. But you don't want to give your opponent any of that information before they actually resolve their brainstorm and make that choice. But as it turns out, I guess it just doesn't matter because Joseph doesn't have an answer to that trigger, and now Tameo does transform and pass back.
Okay, well, now I just don't know what's in Joseph's hand.
He's got to be perhaps a Brazen Borrower. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, we knew the Brazen Borrower and Bitter Triumph from earlier.
Yeah, but I mean, for his instep here, he's gonna go ahead and pull the trigger on this. This is how he's opting to spend the mana for the turn, just to delay Nathan's, which I guess that wasn't a horrible use of that turn if you're able to find land here and keep working your way back into it.
Yeah. If you're going to use the Brazen Borrower, I think it makes sense to use it end step so that Tameo can't get redeployed immediately. Because Nathan did have the extra mana from the Misty Rainforest.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it looked awkward, but it makes sense. There's an Undercity Sewers coming on the end step for Nathan. And he knows that there's the Bitter Triumph in Joseph's hand from that Thoughtseize early in the game.
That's right.
Ooh, interesting. Decides to graveyard a second copy of Tameo that could have let him fight through that Bitter Triumph pretty easily. Even if you're not immediately threatening to transform with a Brainstorm, the Tameo generating a clue every turn in this position is huge. Because Nathan has plenty of extra mana to use to sacrifice on clues and start forcing trades of resources with Joseph, where Nathan will come out ahead.
Speaking of trades of resources, looks like we just had a Wasteland exchange here, which leaves Joseph down on back down to just one land, and it is followed up by a big Murktide from Nathan.
Yeah, Nathan had no interest in those long-term plans. He's trying to end this game quickly, and I do not blame him. With the other Wasteland setting Joseph back to one land, you know he doesn't have another one in hand yet, and now you have a huge clock from Murktide region as long as he can protect it from this Bitter Triumph. So I have to assume Nathan has a way to answer the Bitter Triumph, although I guess post-Wasteland.
We're gonna fight over it on the stack if Joseph doesn't have a second land to work with. You're going to have to do it now, and that means we're going to force the will of the Murktide, and it does in fact resolve. Murktide is been countered, and the follow-up is a second Tameo here for Nathan, who still have a grip of cards, but didn't fight if he could over the Murktide there. Man, still nothing for Joseph, though. Just brutal passing the turn back without a second land.
Nathan has a Force of Will in hand, but he knows that if he used it, Jason just has to draw a Black Source, and then the Bitter Triumph answers the Murktide region. So he'd rather hold the Force of Will for that Bitter Triumph, make sure that his Tameo survives a removal spell, and that will get him the card advantage he needs to find the answer to Joseph's next threat. So once Joseph presents the Force of Will, it makes sense for Nathan to immediately pivot into that card advantage game plan as opposed to the immediately kill you game plan. And he did so brilliantly.
Yep. Now we got the Barrowglyph in addition to the Tameo, and Joseph has found a Ponder, cast the Ponder, kept the cards on top. So I think he's probably found his second land. There it is. It is an Underground Sea, which is followed by a Thoughtseize. So not bad here. Okay. Which does resolve, reveals Force of Will, Dismember, and Brazen Borrower from Nathan. So Nathan, with after losing the Brazen Borrower here, doesn't have a card to pitch to Force of Will. I suppose if it's a land, you could cast it. But more or less all in on what's in play here. So Joseph finds the land, crawls back in it a little bit, does still have 5 cards in hand of his own. So if there was a way back in it, that's the first step. But here comes the swing. Here comes the Tameo trigger. Here comes the Barrogoyf knocking you down to 12.
Wow, and hits can take Murktide Regent or Brazen Borrower off of this Barrogoyf. Murktide Regent would represent lethal damage, but either one represents a blue card to pitch to the Force of Will.
Mm-hmm.
Now Nathan is attacking on all angles. He's got pressure on Joseph's life total with Barrogoyf. He has card advantage from Tameo, and he's already has a Force of Will to stop Joseph's next major card, whether that's a threat or an answer to one of Nathan's threats. So really has all his bases covered at this point. Just needs to play carefully from here on out.
And for what it's worth, he has the clues as well, right? In fact, we just see him because he has that Force of Will, just crack them both. Take my cards, transform my Tameo, firing on all cylinders here. Was able to rebuild just really effectively. Obviously, the Wastelands were just the back-breaking for Joseph in this one.
Just a few too many turns doing nothing, and it's hard to crawl back. Against some decks in Legacy, the other non-blue decks, where they're tapping a lot of mana and you're able to get ahead with your Dazes and Force of Wills, you can come back. But in the blue mirrors, your opponent has all the same cheap and free spells that you do. So they're able to use those to keep you down once you stumble and your opponent gets ahead of you. So just really difficult to play from behind in these blue mirrors, and especially blue Wasteland mirrors.
Yeah, well, Joseph running out Murktide Herald here, or Murktide Regent here. Choosing what he's going to exile, and then we'll get around to what how Nathan wants to handle it.
And I believe Nathan's removal spell in hand is a Dismember. But he can keep swinging in with the Barrogoyf due to Death Touch. I do like that Joseph was cognizant of types for the Barrogoyf, so he exiles in a way that shrinks it.
Okay, well, it looks like it actually is going to hit the battlefield for Joseph. All right, well, we're going to pass the turn back. Nathan untaps, staring down a big Murktide and try to figure out what he wants to do with it. Takes a look at the graveyard. He's got 4 mana to work with. He's got that Tameo hanging out over there in the corner. He's got the Barrogoyf he wants to be able to connect with.
He also has a Brazen Borrower in hand from the Barrogoyf trigger last turn. So he can bounce this Murktide Regent if he wants to, but he's going to allow it to trade for the Barrogoyf. It's also perfectly fine because he has the Tameo ticking towards ultimate.
Exactly. Nathan didn't have to spend any additional cards to answer that Murktide. Just the Barrogoyf, which had already provided value and, in fact, has been replaced. So, yeah, really all things starting to come together here, I think, because the Barrogoyf is a threat you still have to answer, but now you have to worry about the Tameo, which is getting pretty close. So Joseph was able to pull off that Ponder, but I think he's perhaps running out of time here.
Absolutely running out of time. So he has to carefully plan to deploy as many of his cards as he possibly can, try to marshal as many resources to get himself back to even.
Step 1 is Thoughtseize to try to clear the way. That is an important one. Nathan's just going to show the hand.
It is good. Land Bowmasters, Borrower, Dismember, Force of Will. So has the mana to end step this Bowmaster.
Well, it looks like players are at or nearly at time in the round as well, which means for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, when you hit time in the round, but you're not done with your game, you get 5 more turns, starting with turn 0 being the current turn And that means a lot because if you have not determined a winner by the end of those 5 turns, in this case, when it's 1-1, it would end in a draw, which for these players, draws are not equal. So we'll have to see how this plays out over the next few turns. That said, it does look like Nathan has a window to try to close it. You use now against, at least if we understand the time correctly, is against an additional clock, so to speak, in that he has exactly a number of turns to finish it out.
Yeah. So if this is turn 0, Nathan will get turns 1, 3, and 5, and Joseph will get turns 2 and 4. So Nathan has 3 turns left to finish off Joseph and take down this match.
So you can plus Tamio on 1, minus Tamio on 3, and still, have a turn following. So 3 turns there is huge for Nathan. You also 3 turns is close, is enough between the Baraggoyf and the Bowmasters to present lethal through damage. So a whole lot to consider here, especially if that gets called right in the middle of that Thoughtseize resolving. So Thoughtseize takes down the Bowmasters. There's also the Brazen Borrower still hanging around. Can add some damage later.
But the Borrower is also Nathan's only blue card for Force of Will. If that's important to him, if he doesn't find another blue card, he may have to weigh the desire to add another threat versus the desire to maintain alternate cost Force. Joseph going into full stall mode.
Yeah, that's the thing because he's 5-1. Remember, he probably would have drawn into the top 8 if he could have, but instead he got paired down, which means a draw still does, I think, get him into the top 8. We would think because at 5-1-1 he would have the same record as Nathan is hoping to have with a win at 5-1-1. So it's really, the pressure's on Nathan. Can you close this thing out? But we get the Baraggoyf grown up to a 4-5 now. So that helps a little bit. Joseph sitting on 10 life.
Okay, turn 1 for Nathan Marhefke.
All right, well, once again with Baraggoyf, looks like we got a Fairy Macabre being pitched by Joseph to shrink the Baraggoyf down to a 3-4.
Okay. Yeah, any point of damage could matter here, especially that shrinking from 4 to 3 turns us into a 4-turn clock. So if you can stop any later threats without losing any life, the Baraggoyf might not be enough to close out this game for Nathan.
And keep in mind, he took the Bowmasters as well, so that removes a couple of those points of damage. But a second Baraggoyf for Nathan, that is an important clock. Especially if he's still sitting on that counter magic. Here comes a Ponder as a follow-up. This is a very good turn of events here for Nathan. In fact, found another Bowmasters in there as well. So we'll have a couple points of damage later on if he wants it. Draws for the turn. Looks like we're going to crack the fetch immediately here. So must be a 2-drop coming up. And that 2-drop is Douthie Voidwalker.
Wow.
So, wow. Look at Nathan adding 9, well, not adding, but ending with 8 counters on Tamio and 9 power on the board. I think that on turn 1, with 2 turns to go, wow, does that put the pressure on Joseph? Because Nathan looks like he will have the window, not just to close it in 2 turns, but next turn.
And we do know that the Bitter Triumph is still sitting in Joseph's hand, but unlikely to be enough to slow down this onslaught, especially with the Tamio Ultimate coming.
Well, we wondered what we were going to get when we sat down for the Dimir Reanimator Mirror, and it looks like we got all of the round plus some bonus magic, and it has been nothing, if not back and forth. Remember, this game now being decided by this creature beatdown. This was a game where we just said draw, go on 1 versus 2 lands for several turns after a bunch of wastelands. So a lot going on here, and Joseph not willing to pick them up just yet. That's for sure. He's thinking about it, counting it out, going through all of the permutations, but he's just staring down a whole bunch of must answer threats with not a lot of mana to answer them.
This is what I like to call a good think. If you're Nathan, it's your opponent struggling to find a line that gets them back into the game.
Yeah.
So you're content to let them sit there and think through it, and eventually realize they have no outs.
Yeah, just set my cards down on the table, hang out. All right, well, we got some mana getting tapped here. Joseph deciding on something to start it off, and that something is a Cling to Dust. So this is an interesting one. Cling to Dust also can gain life should you need it to, but don't know what he's going to opt to go with here. But this definitely it gives him a couple of choices, I guess. We're going to go ahead and cycle it.
Now exile to the Voidwalker.
All right, well, after all of that, we end up with a Cling to Dust cycling, and I don't know that cycling the man with the limited mana available to him is necessarily where Joseph wanted to be. So still trying to figure out what he can do here to get back in it. You remember what we talked about earlier, the dynamic of, man, it'd be nice if you could just try to reanimate something right now.
Although, well, yeah, at this point, Archon, no, it still wouldn't
I
be
don't know
enough
if
in the
it would be
face of the
enough,
Tamio.
you need a big play. It can be very difficult to get back in the game playing fairly, or in this case, even, I guess, just trying to stall, just trying to survive for a few more turns. But okay, nothing else forthcoming from Joseph on his turn. Passes the turn back, and in the upkeep is going to go for the Bitter Triumph, discarding his own Barrogoyf, it looks like, to target a Barrogoyf. So no cards in hand for Joseph. He's at 7 life. It's turn 3, and Nathan has Tamio at 8 counters and 6 power in play.
Yeah, it only has to do is add an instant to the graveyard for the Barrogoyf, because that's what got exiled by the Fairy Macabre to shrink it. So if you can just find a Brainstorm here off the Tamio ultimate, that should allow him to represent lethal immediately.
Yeah, or a Bowmasters just to ping for the last point. Obviously lots of outs here. Your ultimate Tamio, you're not likely to lose. So very well played mirror match, honestly, by both players here. Got everything we could ask for in round 7, the final round of the legacy trial here today. We got the top 8 coming after this, and it looks like there'll be a shot that it's Nathan in there anyway, because there we go. We're going to put Tamio on the stack, Fatal Push it. That puts the instant into the graveyard to give an additional point of power, and that means a handshake. Nathan Marhefke takes it down over Joseph Geards in the Dimir Reanimator Mirror. What a back and forth that one was, Ross.
Yeah, really, really strong match. Both players moving away from the reanimation plan. So it became a pure Delver mirror, but one that really revolved around Tamio. It was the player that got early Tamio going, putting that threat in the back of their opponent's mind that made it difficult for the opponent to play the other aspects of the game. And so eventually the Tamio gets to ultimate, and that's going to win basically every single game it's activated. And so Tamio is really the story of that match for me. And in 2 out of 3 games, it was Marhefke transforming it early.
Yeah, that was very strong match by him. And you know what? We'll find out if we get to see him play some more, because when we come back on the other side of the break, it is time for the top 8. We'll look at that top 8 announcement, our top 8 players, those top 8 legacy decks they are playing. So stick with us. We'll see you on the other side.